Okay, I think we're going to get ready to start again if people want to take their seats. Okay, so our next speaker is the final speaker we have for you this weekend. Thank you all so much for coming out and hanging out with us, listening to these amazing talks. This is Jaime Lopez. Jaime Lopez is a professor of architecture at USFQ in Quito and Galapagos. He is currently a visiting professor in the 3 p.m. program here at UO, and he's heading the study abroad program to Galapagos this summer. He also did that last summer. I hear it was a great time. His research focuses on the relationship between territory, city, and building. All right, take it away, Jaime.
Thank you very much. Well, you know, it's a big responsibility to close a conference like this one. I've been putting attention of all the panels, and you know, there were great panelists, so I'm gonna do my best. And naturally, my English is not the best. I'm not a native English speaker, but I'm gonna do it. Try to do it well. It seems like an English stam instead of a lecture. But anyway, well, I've been going back and forward with the title of this lecture. And yesterday, there was with a meeting with Gerard and another professor who, I don't know if she's here, which is, her name is Yishao. We came with this idea of original design. So I just put it there, like towards a original design. And so the lecture is going to have a few parts, actually going to have 4 parts, but the takeaways and conclusions are going to leave for the questions and answers that we can take away something altogether, and actually to take away something from the entire weekend that we've been, it had been amazing, this conference. So first of all, I'm gonna talk about me. Actually, it's a little bit of me. The last lecturer said that where you come from actually matters, and what you know actually matters. So this is me. I'm an architect, also an urbanist, and also a regional planner. As they would say, I ran the studio of the Galapagos Summer School. I've been running that for about 12 years now. These last 2 years, we are doing a co-teaching program with UO. And also, we just started. I'm directing the minor in environmental design at USFQ, and I really like that because I always there's a sentence in my head every time I hear the word environmental design, and it's about something that was written by the vice president of the UICN, the International Conservation Union of UNESCO. In 1952, in one of his papers, he said that environmental designers can only plant seeds. And we probably never see what we are doing, but we can only plant seeds. And that's this lecture is going to be about. It's going to be about a little bit of very long time frames. The other thing is, well, I was educated as an architect at USFQ in Ecuador. My study abroad, I did it in Florence, in Italy. I have a master's degree in architecture, urbanism, building science at the TU Delft in the Netherlands. And my PhD, I did it at the Polytechnic University of Catalunya. And right now I'm acting as a visiting professor here. And it's an interesting thing that in 1996, actually, I had the opportunity to either come here or to go to Florence. But at the end of the day, I ended up in Florence, but soon I ended up here now. So I'm kind of closing the circle of the entire thing. So this is me. And I teach at USFQ. I'm a full-time professor, a full-time researcher at USFQ, which is #1 university in Ecuador. And we are number 36 in South America. And we are ranked between the 800 best universities of the world. And we have several there are several reasons for that, but one of them is ecology. So we work very ecological and biodiverse place. We have a research station in the Amazonian jungle. This is a place that is called Tiputini. Actually, it serves that 1 square kilometer of this area. It has more biodiversity than the entire Canada. So it's a very biodiverse place. And also, we have what everyone wants to have, which is a research center and a campus in the Galapagos Islands. This is the place where UO students are going this summer. So the students that are going, we are going over there. And but we also have a research station in Tandayapa, which is the cloud forest, and a research hub in Valencia, Spain. So altogether, that makes our university, USFQ, as a very important university, in ecologically speaking, in Ecuador at least. So where I come from? I come from far, far away. I tend to measure distance in the amount of hours that takes me to get to a place. And I travel about 16 hours when I came here 2 weeks ago. If I compare it with going to Spain, I would have been 5 hours already in Spain. So it's longer than crossing the Atlantic, actually, to come here. So, well, I'm here. So this is Ecuador. Actually, it's really at the equator. So actually, the equator line is 10 minutes from my home. Ecuador, as you see it in the right side of the screen, it has several different bioregions, 4 bioregions. It has the Amazonian jungle, which is very important region in the world. There's a lot of, as I said, there's a lot of biodiversity there, but also has the Andes mountain chain that crosses the entire country from north to south. Actually, there are 42 volcanoes in Ecuador. Out of them, 40 are active. And we have that one, which is called Chimborazo, which is the farthest point on Earth from the center of Earth. It's actually the highest point on Earth if you measure it from the center of Earth. We have the coast. We have the Pacific coast. All our coast is in the Pacific Ocean. And we have the Galapagos Islands. The combination of these 4 bioregions makes Ecuador one of the 11 mega diverse countries in the world. And due to that, a lot of our territory is agriculture. So we produce probably every single fruit and vegetable you can imagine. There's a lot of things we produce. And we export a lot of bananas, we export cacao, we export coffee, actually it's not cafe, coffee grains, we export shrimps. So most of the things that we export are actually agriculture products or primary products. And other big part of our territory is natural protected area. So we have 20% of our territory is national park. And some of the other 20%, it has some sort of protection within our legislation. And only about 10% of Ecuadorian territory is urbanized. And, but we do have cities, big cities. Actually, Quito is one of the biggest cities we have, and there's a very modern city. And some of our cities are very old. Also, Quito is one of the oldest cities in Latin America. And some of them, like Cuenca, which is in the right side of your screen, is, along with Quito, is cultural heritage of the world, also declared by UNESCO. So we have a lot of things, but one of the nicest things we have is that it's our people. The community in Ecuador is very diverse. And we are all mestizos, which means mestizo in Spanish is a little bit different than mixed race. So we're actually mixed cultured. So we kind of make a very mixed culture of mixture of cultures there. So every time you think about architecture or regional planning, you need to start thinking about how do I connect with community? How do I connect with the people that is in there? And that takes me to the first project. I'm going to talk about 3 projects. One is on a professional level, the other one is on a educational level, and the other one is on a research level. So I'm going to talk about the first one, which is about agriculture. Me and my team, we were hired actually in order to create the development plan for this small city, this small region, which is near the coast, as you see it. There you see the map of Ecuador. So it's between the coastline and the Andes Cordillera, I don't know, the Andes mountain chain. And it's a very small city that is crossed by a river. This is the city center. And the composition, the political composition of this is that it had a very small city, like you see, the one that is crossed by a river. But if you see at the map in the left, the green spots and the red spots, the red spot is the city, the green spots are the bigger human settlements. And there are all other these small dots that you see that there are several names on it. There is where the people lives. Actually, this is 456 recintos, which are small areas with houses. And the biggest of these recintos, they have about 150 people living there. So there are very small recintos spread around, and it gathers about 40,000 people spread around in this territory. It's a big territory. And when we arrived, they only gave us this, which is the land use of they said, well, this is the land use. As you can see, there was the red spot, it was the urban land, the rest of it was agriculture. And in the other side was the land use of the city. And if you look at this, they are really building right next to the river, and there are several things that were not precisely good. So we started the project, and it was 2020. So we started the project with our goal, it was 2050. So we decided to do a 30-year project going for development. And the first thing we analyzed was the amount of people that was going to be in 2050. And we realized that the city was not going to grow that much because there's a lot of migration from the countryside to other cities that are bigger. So the population was going to pretty much be the same at the end of it. But here you can see, if you see in 2020, there's 30,000 people living in the rural area and only 11,000 living in the almost urbanized areas. Actually, but in the city by itself, there were about 9,000 people living. And most of those people were located along the river, which is a little bit difficult in Ecuador because during winter time, these rivers, especially the rivers in the coast, they tend to overflow, and it can create a very big natural hazard for the people who live next to a river. And also, this project was done during the pandemic. So we were in a state of emergency. We were not supposed to be there, but we needed to get in touch with the people. So this was one of the workshops we did with the community, but we only managed to gather about 30 people or 50 people within the community. But we said that's not enough. We need to certainly go to the community. So what we did is we went to visit these 456 areas. We convinced the mayor to take us to all of these areas to talk with the people in the community, to ask them what they are doing, to ask them what they want. And we make several surveys in the rural area and in the urban area. And these are some of the things that they came out of those surveys. They believe that the area was progressive, beautiful, touristic, but they also wanted a lot of medical attention, security, water. They have a big problem with water and security. And also it was many things about the countryside. They wanted to keep producing. So we look at it, and we saw that there was no service. So they didn't have telecommunications. There was no water or water treatment plants or wastewater treatments. Also, the access to water was very difficult because there is no drinkable water in this area. They are only getting water from the wells and from the wetlands. And so it was very difficult, and they were starting to suffer a water scarcity, especially in the rural land. And and this was the water capacity and let's say all the infrastructure that was installed in the city. And the areas that were next to the river had more infrastructure than the rest of it. So we decided to first of all see how actually was the land being used. So we realized that yes, it was entirely productive, so there was a lot of production going on, and they were producing a lot of corn and rice. But there were 4 types of production. One was actually made by companies, so it was a very industrialized production. One was a combined industrialized and commercial. The other one was commercial, and the last one was for self-consumption. But most of it, if you look at the legend, most of it was the green area, which 85% of the territory was for commercial production, which means that it was produced by the families, but sold to the big companies. That's the only thing. And we look at what was happening with the protected areas, what was happening with the streams and with the wetlands that were all around the place. And we realized that there were several areas that were not considered at the moment of the production. So, and did the same thing in the city. So instead of listening to what was the land use, we went to the entire city. We took several videos of the city, and we analyzed all the activities that were happening inside the city, and we mapped them, and we create this map, and to create a new type of land use. And also we look at the certain areas along the river to see if we were able to create a buffer or areas to be flooded in the case of the winter coming. And we also went to see how the different small, we call it recintos, how the different small settlements were working. We realized that there were 2 different small settlements. One was a very consolidated way, which were living more than 150 people, and the other ones were like sparse around the territory. So there were like 2 or 3 houses together, and that's it. So, and that's how the things were going. And most of these areas didn't have any type of infrastructure. So we decided to propose, along with the people, where do we put education, where do we put security, where do we put the health care all around the territory, and to use the city itself as a center for incentivate the production. But we also change with that the idea of the land use of the entire city, creating this buffer zone within with the river and with a protected land upside. We start thinking about homogeneous zones in the productive area, in the agricultural land. So we came with this source. It's called ecological economic zoning. We were thinking about all the homogeneous areas, biophysical areas, and productive areas that were together. So we came up with these 4 or 5 kind of polygons. And we used digital imagery to understand the health of the crops. And we realized that those crops that were actually being too close or actually over the wetlands, they didn't have good health, and they were not as productive as the crops that were respecting the distance of the wetlands and the streams. So in that sense, we demonstrate to the people that this is what was happening. So in these images, the red ones are the crops that do not have good health, and the green ones are crops that have actually good health. So and we did that in several in different areas, and so with that and with the help of the population, we proposed to the major to create and to see the rural area as a system integrating natural protected areas, which is to protect the wetlands and to protect the streams in order to increase the production, and to use all the urban and rural settlements as part of this. So to integrate all of this into a very logic system for development for the entire area. And well, this is a picture of my team. You see me in the middle, and some of the guys from the community that were working with us. This is the day we submit the plan for the municipality. Luckily, the municipality accepted, and it became a policy 2 years after we developed this, and they are working on this. This is done in 2020, so we are still yet to see what is happening or whether it is happening something with it. So the second project, which it's more on an academic level, the idea, but it has a very interesting framework. It is on the city of Quito. Quito is one of the highest cities highest capitals in the world. Actually, I think it's the third one. It's over 30,000 meters over the sea level. That would be about 9,000 feet over the sea level. So it's a very high altitude. Actually, some of you go there during the first week. You might suffer from headaches or things like that due to pressure and lack of oxygen. And it's actually the oldest historic center in South America. It was founded in 1536. So it's a very old city. It has more than 500 years. And it literally grows over the mountain, as you can see. It lies over a volcano, and it grows over the mountain. And the fun thing is that the volcano is active. So I have seen it erupting when I was young. So it's a nice thing that happens. So here's the topography of that area. So you can see all of this is in relationship with the watershed that creates Quito. And this is the hydrology of that area. So you see the rivers that happen across there. And this is the city. So the city is actually very intricate with the rivers and with the topography and all the physical geography fit. And that actually creates a very conflictive relationship between the city and the rivers and the city and its topography. All these areas here that are in red in the first map are areas where people live and they should not be there. So because they should be protected areas in order to preserve nature and in order to preserve the rivers and the ravines. And those things create floodings, even though if you look at the last one, there's a lot of potential for agriculture, and there's a lot of potential for tourism. This is the main river. It's called Machangara. Machangara in the original language is called the water serpent, and it crosses the entire city actually from north to south. And 100 years ago, the relationship that the city used to have with the river was almost ideal relationship. The people were actually able to go down and touch the river and take pictures. You see the pictures over there. There were people really using the river in a very nice way. And if we look the map, that map was actually from 1926. It's a topographical map of 1926. And you see the city actually respects the river and respects the ravines that create the river. But that doesn't happen anymore. The urban development have made some of the majors to put streets and avenues over the creeks, and that happens that the water, when the water doesn't have the ravine to go, they just go over the city. So this tends to happen every single winter. we get flooding, and actually there's every single winter, every single year, there are people dying because of the way we deal with the watershed. But that's not only that. The fact is that the city of Quito doesn't have a water treatment plant. So the entire sewage system goes directly, black waters and gray waters go directly to the river. So it's one of the, it's fully polluted. It's completely polluted with all the sewage from the almost entire city. It's 85% of the buildings, they throw their sewage system in this river. So one thing that happened is that the community got tired of it. So, and this is a picture of a very important meeting because I was invited to this meeting. It's a picture of a very important meeting because in that meeting, the several collectives of the community decided to put a lawsuit against the government, against the city government. A good thing on top of our constitution is that nature has rights. So we won the lawsuit. And actually the river was declared by the Constitutional Court as an individual with rights. And reparations needs to be done. So the city needs to repair and to clean the river. But here's the thing, it's going to be very difficult. You hardly are able to clean a river that was systematically polluted for 100 years in a small period of time. So we actually know, talking with biologists, with ecologists, we actually know that once the river is clean, once you are not throwing any more pollution to the river, it will take at least 15 to 20 years to clean itself, because it renew itself. So if we start tomorrow, actually, if we start in 2025, the process of generating all the water treatment plants would take about 10 to 15 years, because they need around 22 for a sewage system that is not prepared for receiving those. So you need to do a lot of infrastructure. And if we start tomorrow, we will have a clean river by 2065, moreover. So it's about 40 years. But that's not the only thing, because we will have a clean river by 2065, but we won't have a good health in the watershed, because the ravines will still be closed and everything will still be closed. So what we did is we decided to make a 100-year plan to regenerate the river and to recover the health of the watershed. So these are my students, the ones in the left, and we started trying to communicate for the people, students from the high school. We put together several experts on ecology, several experts on biology, and try to understand what we were able to do to clean the river in 100-year time. So we realized that we needed several systems: a green system, a blue system, a green-blue system, and also infrastructural system like grade construction. We needed to understand the geology of the river. We needed to understand the biosystems of the river. So it was there's a lot of things to be done. And the sentence came out like a few months ago, 8 months ago. So we are still working on this. And it probably will take us a lot of time. So we did this, we came out with this several strategies. So this is a green strategy to open several areas that are closed now. There's also several infrastructure that need to be built, but also there's several integration within the mobility systems and within the housing system of the city, in order to be able to create this what we call water communities. So we think that We know there are several strategies as, let's say, water-driven strategies for the city. So we decided to look at those strategies, water-sensitive urbanism, that is called, to see when this can be inserted in the city. So we came up with the idea that all together would create this type of new city from 100 years from now. So we don't want to go back to the wild ideas of the. We don't want to go back to the wild to recover the mountain as it was, but we want to start living with the river now. So, and we made these images with my students. So a clean river and also several infrastructure. Actually, my house is somewhere around here. So yeah, and the university is somewhere around here. So this is a place that exists. So we made this image to show how the city could be if we open all the ravines again and we open everything again in 100 years from now. So now if you see these lines of parks that you look in this image, they are actually, at this moment, they are actually avenues and they are cars over it. So we want to transform the city in a very slow process. We are going to make an exhibition in May, and we are putting together artists, we're putting together scientists and ecologists to make an exhibition to try to reach people and to try to, for the community to be informed that how much time this can take, but they need to certainly be active in order to get. I'm pretty sure that I'm not going to be able to see this in my lifetime, but probably, I don't know, maybe my grandson or my granddaughter would be able to see this. And so that's the other project. And the last project that I'm going to show you is more a research project that has been taking most of my time, actually, and it's in the Galapagos Islands. So this is the Galapagos Islands. They are located about 1,000 kilometers from the continent, and they have these beautiful animals and these beautiful landscapes that I'm going to talk a little bit more about. But first, I want you to see this.
degrees west, 1 degree south. A world lost in the vastness of the Pacific. Home to the strangest life imaginable. Governed by nature's brutal forces. Islands which have transformed our understanding of life on Earth.
So what you just saw is the introduction of a very well published documentary of the BBC of London that was published in 2015. And that's how the Galapagos are presented to the world, like these very pristine area where no human have ever touched, and we have been able to literally showcase evolution in the Galapagos Islands. But what you might not know is that there are 300,000 tourists coming to the Galapagos every year. So, and with 300,000 tourists, you also need cities, and you also need people. So something that is not published, and for several decades it was almost hidden, is that there are cities in the Galapagos Islands, and there is 30,000 people living in the Galapagos Islands. And very little of introduction. 97% of the territory of the Galapagos is protected land. And the other 3% is divided between agricultural areas and urban areas. And it has also 2 marine reserves. The Galapagos Marine Reserve, which is the area surrounding the sea surrounding the islands, and the Sisterhood Marine Reserve, which is a marine reserve that is a corridor that connects the Cocos Island with the Galapagos, the Cocos Marine Reserve with the Galapagos Marine Reserve, that was actually done recently in 2023. And it actually goes towards the migration paths of the sharks, so to connect both archipelagos. It has a very peculiar and particular geology, very peculiar and particular ecology and ecosystems. So it has more than one ecosystem. It has several ecosystems, actually. And I'm not going to tell you about all of that, because it's going to take, we would get out tomorrow if I start going into it. But this very peculiar geography and very peculiar ecosystem, it creates very peculiar animals. 30% of the animals that you find in the Galapagos Islands, 30% of the species, animals, plants, insects that you find in the Galapagos Islands, you will only find in the Galapagos Islands. They do not exist anywhere else. And like these guys, you have the marine iguana or the flightless cormorant, they only exist in the Galapagos Islands. But there are also human elements, and there's way too many human elements for such a small population of 30,000 inhabitants. It has, Galapagos has 3 cities. It has 5 rural settlements. It has 4 agricultural zones, 3 airports, and 5 ports for 30,000 people. And these are the cities. And as you can see, all the cities are actually kind of surrounded by rural no, it's not rural, it's protected land. So they are literally these very well-defined boundaries of within the protected space. One thing that I admire from the book of The Origin of Species of Charles Darwin is actually the genius thing of this book is that Darwin found out the mechanism of evolution. So that's the genius in Charles Darwin's thought. And the mechanism of evolution of what Charles Darwin says is that organic forms, they evolve due to its geography, due to the geography they are in. And this is the perfect example, the marine iguana. It's the only marine iguana, the only marine reptile in the world. It's not an amphibious, it's a reptile. And it actually, when it arrived hundreds of thousands of years ago, it was green, and it used to eat plants over the surface. But when it arrived to the Galapagos, and that's pretty much the landscape of Galapagos, there's nothing growing in there. It's a volcanic area. And so the marine iguana learned how to swim. And in order to be able to eat, it changed its color, it changed its shape, it changes some of its organs, mutate inside in order to be able to swim and to eat. And so these are how the different animals become endemic. So the endemic forms are actually defined, or what is endemic? What is an endemic form? It's a term that is defined as the result of the process of adaptation. to a place with very specific geographical characteristics. So it produces a form that belongs exclusively to that place. That's why the subtitle of the origin of species is called the selection of natural selection. So that's why Charles Darwin talks about natural selection, because in his words, in his diaries, he literally said, it's nature who selects which species preserves and which species disappear. So it's actually nature who preserves which species would disappear. So I came out with this idea, it's a very crazy idea, that sooner or later, if we think as cities, as part of nature, and if we think ourselves as part of nature, we don't put ourselves outside nature, and cities would be our natural environment, actually. And they would be organic forms, collective organic forms. And sooner or later, if we actually manage ourselves to adapt to geography, we will create endemic cities, which means that we would refer to a city that is that have evolved to acquire an urban form that is completely adapted to the geographical conditions of the region where this city is located, and which is not found anywhere else in the world. And that's a very interesting thing, because in Galapagos it's not like you can see that, but you can research the relationship between urban form, built form, agricultural land, and protected land in a very close system. As we saw, urban land is very much defined by protected land, but it's actually excluded from the protected land. And it's a very close system, because here we see the city. We have the city here, we have the urban, the agricultural land here, and all of the rest is protected land. And that protected land is at the same time surrounded by sea. So it is a very close, very controlled system. And it's also politically controlled system and legally controlled system, because the Galapagos law doesn't allow anyone to go and live there. Actually, I keep saying that for me, as an Ecuadorian, would be easier to get a US citizenship instead of a permanent residence in the Galapagos Islands, being Ecuadorian. Actually, so it's very much easier for me to do that. So in order to see whether or not a city is adapted to its environment, I came up with this idea of there are several ways that we can see how much adapted is the city to the environment. So there are certain natural elements that create that you can find in every city, such as rivers, ravines, creeks, mountains, volcanoes, and it will depend on how much the city respects those elements. And these are the elements that create the edges of the city, that creates the borders of the cities, and they create the form, the regular form of the city. So that's the first one. The second one is that every landscape and every geography has what I call formative composition, so formative elements of the landscape, which means they have a sun, they have water, they have wind, and most of the time, we as human beings react also to those components of the landscape with the things we build. In Galapagos Island, in the Galapagos, it's a very fun idea, because there is no such a thing as an indigenous culture. Every single person that lives in Galapagos is either a migrant or descendant of migrants. There was human beings are not originally from Galapagos Islands, so we are kind of an introduced species in the islands. And due to the fact that it's fully protected, you cannot build with local materials. So you cannot use the wood, you cannot use the stone of the Galapagos. So they actually only use concrete blocks, because that is cheaper, and that's the material that they get to build. So if you take away culture, so you're taking away vernacular architecture. If you take away materials, you take away also the relationship with the environment in that sense. So the only thing that it that you have to actually make some sort of a relationship with the environment is the form of the house, or the form of the building. So and I made this this thing with the people from the community. This is a very fun exercise that I call what is a house. And actually, I did it with my students. Some of my students are here. And you just ask a person to draw a house, and that person will be able to do it. But because they have some sort of an idea of what a house is. But then if you ask that person to define a house, that's a complete differentiation. It's very difficult to define what a house is, being completely sure what it is. So these are the drawings that the community made. And if you look at the buildings, they are really very much look alike. And it is because if you pay a little bit of attention of these buildings, they have these roof terraces that actually create this insulation layer between the building and the rest of the and the sun. They have a higher ground floor that actually creates ventilated ground floor. And the fun thing is that this is made without architects. So the people, most of the Galapagos buildings are made without architects. They are made by the people that arrive there and they find out how to build. And the thing is that when you compare with some buildings that are actually built with architects and that are not built with architects, they look pretty much alike. It's a fun thing that we are now building a new campus in the Galapagos Islands, and we have a lead specialist. We are working with ecological engineering to see to calculate to the minimal how much sun we are getting, how much wind we're getting. And the fact is that if you look at the result, formally speaking, only formally speaking, they look pretty much alike. Actually, that's a fun thing. Another issue is that on how to know how much a city adapts to nature is to see whether or not it respects the interactions with nature. So there are several interactions. There is horizontal, vertical interactions. And when we do not respect that, we will have problems like the ones I showed before in the city of Quito. Because like in this case, there are caves somewhere around here, and they are building over the caves. So you have this whole area is in danger of collapse. And it's because we are not taking nature in consideration. And it happens that also when we work at the level of the watershed. So in this case, the watershed was also changed a lot in the land surface. Another thing is that it doesn't matter how much we go out of the city, the rural areas, the areas that we use for recreation outside the city, they have connections. And all those paths and all the roads that we create, they create some sort of infrastructure that spreads around landscape. So at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how protected the area is. If we put roads and these things, we will still have some sort of infrastructure over the landscape and over the geography that integrate each other. And lastly, another way to see how much a city would relate with the environment, it's on the details and the materials that we are using. For example, in this case, in 1930s, there was introduced a very specific wood in the Galapagos Island that is called cedrela, Spanish cedar, actually. And well, the fact that that was not the right wood to be introduced, because as you can see in the left side is the original indigenous landscape, and in the right side is the Spanish cedar forest. So it has nothing to do with the environment, and it actually changes the entire environment because it creates shadow, it creates more humid areas, just because we introduced the wrong material in this case. So those ideas that I'm trying to introduce on how to evaluate how much a city is adapted to the environment can be used as a descriptive manner or in the way that I just use it, but also we can use it as design strategies. So if we try to understand how much we can design a city to adapt to the environment, like working in the public space, in the areas where the interspecies interaction happens, or when we're working in housing. These are some projects of my students that they work with the same typologies we just saw, but they are looking for different materials and different type of woods that would be helpful for the environment instead of damaging. But also you can work on the level of the landscape when you're working with the migration paths of the tortoises, or also also when you're trying to understand how the topography reacts. Finally, another genius thing that Charles Darwin did, it was this drawing. This drawing is a very interesting one. When he went back to England, he was taken from the Galapagos. People said that it were finches, but they were not actually finches, they were actually mockingbirds. And he was taken to the mockingbirds from the Galapagos, and he was analyzing the Galapagos. And when he was doing that, he drew this. If you see, there is this point of departure here, and then there are several branches that come out of there. And he writes here, "I think." And the legend says that he came out with this because he remembered, and actually that is written in his diaries. He remembered this conversation that he had with the governor of Galapagos in 1835, that the governor of Galapagos told him, "I am able to recognize from which island is comes every tortoise just by looking at the shell." And the fact is that he was right. Charles Darwin realized that with the mockingbirds, but also he was right. In the left side, you see the tortoises from Santa Cruz, which are the biggest dome tortoises that have the dome shell. And in the right side, you see the tortoises from San Cristobal that have the Hasselback shell. And it is because if you see at the floor, the tortoise of Santa Cruz is able to eat from the ground, and the tortoise of San Cristobal is not able to eat from the ground. It needs to rise the neck in order to eat something. So that's why the shell changes. And if we think about cities and the cities in the Galapagos also, we already started to look at the other cities, which is San Cristobal. And we realized that in San Cristobal, you don't have these giant creeks that define the city, but it does have streams. And these streams are actually shaping the city, but also the typologies. The weather of San Cristobal is much different from the weather of Santa Cruz. Actually, they are like about 3 million years difference between the ages of the islands. So that creates a very different geology and a very different ecology. And also it reflects in the typological elements that you are able to see in what people build. So we are working already now on how does the city integrates or respects or not the protected elements. And also when we analyze the rural area, how does areas such as the aquifers or the ravines integrate with agriculture. And this is also a project, well, it's not these are some of the results of the students that came last year in Galapagos, the UO students that came last year. We were trying to understand how to integrate the city with the public spaces with what is happening in the highlands. So we are coming out with a way to assess socio-ecological interactions in public space in the city, and also at the same time find a way to use the ideas of the first settlers that were dealing with architecture, with agriculture and sustainable agriculture in the highlands. And here's some of our students, actually, there's some of US students that came last year. And this is a farm, which is a very nice farm because they are pairing coffee with the Scalecia trees, which is an endemic species, and that endemic species is actually the food for the giant tortoises. And at the same time, the farm is allowing people to go there to visit the giant tortoises and to see the giant tortoises. So they create this kind of a socio-ecological and economic interaction between the protecting space and the agricultural land, and also the touristic possibilities of it. And I'm gonna show you, I want to show you this. This is a video that was done for with my students 10 years ago. Actually, it was done in 2015. And it's a video that was entirely filmed by them. And it's actually what I think Galapagos should start, what I see, what I want my students to see when they go to the Galapagos. Does anyone have a question or comment, complaint? That's a great question, actually. To tell you the truth, I haven't thought about that. And you know, here's the thing: there's a lot of things happening in the islands, and if we're thinking about the Galapagos Islands, there's a big problem with production there, because in order to feed 30,000 people, you need to industrialize. You need to create industrial agriculture. However, you cannot industrialize a protected land. And so that actually becomes this kind of paradox of what's going on in there. So it would never be enough production to feed 30,000 people there. And also, the idea of that many of the tourists that actually go to the city have provoked that the people that own the farmland, they abandon the farmland and they go down to the city, try to make a hotel and try to make a living out of tourism, because to produce in the Galapagos Islands is very expensive, because you cannot, you don't have a truck, you don't have the way to produce fast. So most of the things that are produced are hand-picked, and they are very crafty elements, and they're very, very crafty materials. So it's very expensive to produce, and there's a lot of labor going on. So I don't think there should be, for now, I certainly don't know how Galapagos would be able to reach a percentage, a relationship between that. If you're thinking about other areas, probably in like in the city of Mocache, for example, most of the things that were produced in the city of Mocache, they were not for the citizens. They were actually going to the market, and they were actually going to some of those are actually going to exports and things like that. So then you create an overproduction in order to be able to commercialize with it. So I don't think there's a right answer to how many people or how much it would be the percentage of it.
Have you been able to apply any of the of your research from the Galapagos to any of, I guess, regional design efforts on the mainland? And if so, do you have any examples of what those lessons might have looked like?
Well, not yet, to tell you the truth. I'm trying to do that, but it would be very, very interesting to deal with it. The fact is that the research in Galapagos, it doesn't finish. It's not. That's why when I talked to about the other projects, I was able to put a time frame on it. Like 30 years from now, the city will be like this. So 100 years from now, the city will be like this. But when you're talking about the Galapagos Islands, you're thinking more about evolution of human race, or evolution of human species, actually, and how are we able to evolve in order to create cities that are actually adapted to the environment. So in that sense, I haven't been able to do it. However, I do think that if you just use it as a strategy to evaluate things, it would be very possible to deal with it. The buildings that were proposed actually are considering to use native or endemic species as part of the materials, which is something that I have discussed a lot with the national park, actually, because the national park ecologists have this idea that they need to preserve things as if it was a museum. They want to preserve the ecosystem as if it was a museum. So they don't want anyone to use native or endemic species in their buildings. But if you produce them to use them in your buildings, it would be very possible to do it. Actually, right now we are with a colleague of mine and the University of Texas. We are doing a research on which one of the woods of endemic or native woods are good for construction. So, but it had taken about 5 years to get the permits from the Galapagos National Park to be able to take out a piece of wood to send it to the laboratory and see what is the material properties of those woods.
I was wondering, from the maps, it looked like the agricultural and urban areas were much more than 3% islands. Is that because there's some islands that you didn't show that don't have agricultural areas and urban areas on them?
Yeah, exactly. Human beings are only using actually 5 islands. Human settlements are in 4 islands, and there's a 5th island that has infrastructure. But the Galapagos has more than 230 islands, and most of them are not inhabited. Human beings are actually within the largest islands and some of the oldest islands. And that's also a problem, because if you look at the maps, the areas that they are using, they are much more than 3%. Actually, if you look at what happened in the island of Santa Cruz, which is has the bigger population on it, the human beings are occupying about 15% of the island, and actually they already have changed about 70% of the humid ecosystem at the top of the island to in favor of agriculture and cattle.
And related to that, is the population growing? The population that lives there growing in the Galapagos? And as a side of question, is the population yesterday there was a talk about Japan, where many of their 90% of their municipalities are shrinking, but is the population of your country growing, and is that also reflected in the population that live in the Galapagos?
Well, there's a lot of illegal migration to the Galapagos Islands, actually, and the fact is that the tourists, the visitors keep growing, the number of visitors keep growing, and if the number of visitors keep growing, the population keeps growing. So that's moreover the rate. They have calculated that for every 10 visitors, you will find 1 person more. So right now, there are being calculations that in a few years from now, there will be 50,000 people in the Galapagos Islands. They used to have a ratio of population of growing of 7% per year, which is a really high ratio of growing.
This has been really interesting. Thank you. This is just a short question. Is there any entity or any people who are talking about limiting how many visitors visit the Galapagos Islands?
You know, that's a question that has been thought for, I think the first time the question was posed, it was 1991. No, actually, sorry, it was 1988. They posed that question. So how to limit, what's the number of people that the Galapagos is able to have as tourists? So they wanted to limit it. At the beginning, there was no technical usage for it. There was no technical advisor that would say, this is the moment, this is how many visitors we will have. But the moment they actually said we will only receive 20,000 visitors per year, there were already 40,000 tourists going there. So it was not working. In 1998, the Galapagos National Park started with what is called it is a way to evaluate how many visitors the Galapagos can carry. So it was called the carrying capacity of the natural protected sites for visiting. However, when the amount of visitors reached the carrying capacity, they were just adding some more visiting places. So in that sense, in 1990 there were about 70 visiting places, and now there are more than 170 visiting places. So there's the number of visitors that keeps growing. And also, what happened last year is that they wanted to limit one way or another the amount of visitors. So they increased the amount that you have to pay to enter the Galapagos Islands. So I don't know what is going to happen with it, but it didn't reduce the amount of the number of visitors actually.
You'd mentioned the Spanish cedar is an invasive species in the island. Can that be used to construct? Is it good for construction? Is that a way to address things? And
That's actually what it happens. So here's the fact: the Spanish cedar is an invasive species, and the Galapagos National Park, due to the fact that that's an invasive species, they allow you to use that for doors and for other furniture. However, that have created a market for that species itself. So there are illegal plantations of Spanish cedar. So at the end of the day, you are giving value to something that shouldn't have value. And so you create a market for it.
Chance for questions? Oh.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Your talk on Quito and the water quality problems. So, do they have plans to build a sort of a series of water treatment facilities to treat the sewage, to try to minimize the water quality problems? And is that sort of planned over a long period of time?
Actually, right after the sentence, the municipality came out. It took them 5 days to say, well, we're going to build 22 water treatment plants, and we are going to spread them around the city. But now it has passed 8 months, and they still don't have a plan to implement the plan. So they still don't know how to implement the 22 water treatment plants or where they are going to be. And it is thought, it has been said that they are going to, the last plan is going to be built in 2045, if I'm not wrong. So it's going to take about 20 years to do that. We're thinking of, there's also one thing we need to think when we are talking about Quito. We are a developing country. So Ecuador is a developing country. So there's not so much money when you're thinking about building water treatment plants to cover 3.5 million sewages. People, it's going to be very expensive, and the people from the municipalities do not have that amount of money. So they need to go towards international banking systems and international loans and all those things. So it's going to take a lot of time because it's also a very political element of what would happen. And there are other problems also. And people, when you're talking about politics in these areas, the politicians tend to do what you're able to see. And many of the people in Ecuador and in Quito, they don't know what is happening with the river. They just don't see the river because most of it is underground. So it's creating, the idea here is to find the way to force the hand of the municipality to really invest in a faster way to the water treatment plants.
So when I visited, I noticed that there was like a kind of a class structure in terms of the tourists that go to the island. And so like the more, I guess, the more you limit the amount of people that are able to visit, I mean, you're going to have to increase the price, or somehow you're going to have to come up with mechanisms to limit the amount of tourists. And so in a way that kind of creates this kind of inequality of who can actually experience, the Galapagos Islands. But one of the questions I had was, like the high-end kind of tourists that just rent like yachts, you know, and they basically spend their entire time on the yachts and visit the different islands and so forth. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that kind of tourism. Is that kind of tourism like less like impactful in terms of the environment, or is it worse than just like the normal kind of, you know? Yeah.
Well, at the beginning, there was the idea that only that type of tourist would go to the Galapagos Islands. So the only tourist that you would receive, it was cruise type tourists. So they were going to be in the boat. They were not going down, and they were going to be just visiting the non-inhabited islands. But that created a problem with the people from the community, because of course they were there, but they were not receiving anything from the tourists. So there was a lot of investment in tourism, and they were not receiving anything from the tourists. So what happened is that later on they decided to make or force the cruises to stop for a while in the inhabited islands, to be able to, for those people to make a living or some sort of a living out of that tourism. Especially after 1998, when the marine reserve was declared as a natural protected space, fishery was forbidden. So if you're not able to produce agriculture, if you're not able to fish something, you need to live out of something. And so in this case, tourism was kind of the answer for the people that was based their economies in a more basic element. So right now, there's inland tourism is bigger than cruise tourism. So you have more hotels than cruise ships.
Any other questions, Clark?
I'm curious if you could say a little more about what you see as the main elements that would make up one of these endemic cities that you mentioned. Like, I'd just like to hear more about that idea.
Well, the idea of endemic city is that it's a city that is adapted. You know, it's and it is not. It's not a new idea, actually. I just put a name on it. But the idea that cities can adapt towards to the environment is something that I defend, that can be traced back to Charles Darwin, actually. With Gerard, we're talking about it all the time. And because actually we are part of nature. We are human beings, we are a species. And even though we try to think that we are not part of nature, and we are trying to think that the things we do are actually artificial, that's not entirely true. Because our main environment is not the jungle. Our main environment is not the desert. We live in cities, and that's our natural habitat. So actually, cities become part of nature. So if you think in that way, sooner or later, we need to adapt to our geographical issues. Otherwise, as Charles Darwin says, nature will select us out. So that's what I mean.
Any more questions? Okay, well, thank you so much, Jaime.
Thank you.